good. So, hi everyone. Thanks for tuning in to another episode here of the Announcers Hour. It's our fourth episode. We also have Cal Friedman, who's going to be joining us today, which is great to have somebody that's already out there in the professional realm of broadcasting and giving out some great information. And just a short intro on Cal. He's right now in Garden City, been voice of the Broncbusters there with the community college, also done a lot of work in writing. And I know as the sports director with Western Kansas News, so doing more writing as well, and done a lot of on-camera stuff going back to Miami and UMTV, SportsDesk, the whole nine yards. But I mean, Cal, I guess how have you been? And I guess can you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Man, things have been great. I picked up this really early in life, and I've always kind of had a dream of being a broadcaster. So I moved out to Garden City, took a chance on myself to work with the Broncbusters, like you said, also working with the Garden City High School Buffaloes, and the experience has been nothing short of awesome. This is my ninth month here. I've gotten to do football across the state. Just got done with Jayhawk Conference basketball tournament, and then I'm getting to do baseball starting next week, which I'm super stoked for.
Yeah, that's awesome. I know baseball is going to be a hefty season coming up for a lot of people. That's where a lot of the broadcasting opportunity for sure comes. And I guess how's that adjustment been going from Miami to Garden City? Because I bring that up, I know a lot of people that like, when they want to get into sports, they're going to be moving around a lot. So you go from like, a big city to a smaller thing. How has that adjustment been?
Yeah, if I had a nickel for every time that someone told me that Miami and Garden City are a little different, I think I could have bought out my contract here. But it's been great. You know what it is I've been dealing with so many great supportive coaches that have made my transition so easy because they understand where some of the guys come from. The person that was here before me was from Ball State, which I guess isn't as big of a difference than Miami, but overall, they've all done a very good job helping me, making me fit in with the community. I've tried my best to get as involved with the teams as I can, whether that's just going out to practice, getting to meet with coaches after their games, even going out for food with some. So I felt like right at home ever since I got here.
That's great. And I guess what has been your favorite moment in broadcasting, like with Garden City?
Oh, man, there's a lot of good ones. I would have to say my favorite moment right now is our point guard for our basketball team scored 44 points in a game. But the cooler part about that was that we were playing in an arena, old school arena that doesn't actually have a jumbotron or even just a board where you can look up and see the numbers. And this is somebody who had 12 in the first half, and then he just got on fire in the middle of the second. And I'm thinking, okay, this has gone from like a career night to a program setting night. And with about 2 minutes to go in the game, he gets fouled and is going to the line. And one of my assistant coaches, Mike Harmon, who I've had so many great experiences with, turns to me and goes like, "How many points does Brody have?" Because I have the stats pulled up on my computer, and I tried to get it to him with my hands. He couldn't quite get it, so I did one of those like speak out loud. Robinson's heading to the line for 40 points, and his jaw just drops. Like he had no idea. He starts tapping the other assistants. Coach Jack turns to me. Jax turns to me. Our shooting guard got subbed off after he got to 44, and he overheard me on his way to the bench, and he just turns back to me. He goes, "He has what?" So it was really cool because everyone was kind of tuned into me at the end of that game as I was reading off what wound up being a historic night. It was the most ever points that someone had scored for our program, but it was just that much cooler that those guys were relying on me for the information.
Yeah, that it is. And by the way, I think that tails off into something good. Like at Miami, I know, and this is going to be the case. Like if you were, I mean, I'm guessing at a really big program, they already have like a separate person for like game notes and tracking historical data. How were you able to, in that moment, know, like, did you have to really do digging to find what the program record was for like the points and know and keep track of that as you're doing the game?
Yeah, I was fortunate that night. Our athletic director travels to a lot of games, and he was right there next to me, feeding the information, almost like what we have with our SIDs at Miami. So he was able to get it to me once he got to 40. I knew the mark was 44. So I was able to relay that information once that helped. But we do also have season game notes. We don't do individual game notes, but we have a season packet where it goes through historical records. So I was able to turn through that and see it.
All right, awesome. That's a cool note as well. But I guess going back to like throwing it way back, when did you know you wanted to get into this specific injury with broadcasting or industry, I should say, in sports play-by-play and broadcasting?
It's been a while since I wanted to be in it. The moment that I knew I could be in it didn't come until probably late on in my college career because I grew up playing a lot of different sports. I give a lot of credit to my dad for me getting into this industry. He raised me as a sports fan. I played every single sport I could have growing up. I'd spend my Sundays watching NFL, my Saturdays waking up watching college game day. And eventually it gets to the point where you're 12, 13 years old and you're like, hang on, there's only so many professional athletes in the world. You've got to be pretty good at this to make it pro. And I got to that point, was like, you know what? No, this probably isn't for me. But what was for me is I was an extrovert at the time and I really loved talking sports with a lot of my friends. And I realized, like, hang on a second, there's people who get paid to travel the country, go to some of the coolest events in the world, and they're not spending a dime. It's these companies that are getting them out there to these events. I love talking about sports. I obviously had played a lot, so I knew everything I needed to. And I got into broadcasting when I got to Miami because back in my hometown, there weren't a whole ton of like radio freelancing opportunities. I did do some public address work for my middle school. That's kind of where it all started. Was my middle school let me do public address announcing for my eighth grade year for our girls and boys basketball team. And apparently I did a good enough job that our teacher called me back the next year when I was in high school, was like, do you want to do this again? So I wound up doing that for 4 years, which was just super incredible. That's where I kind of got comfortable. And then I got to Miami, started with WVUM my first week on campus, worked my first game, I want to say 3 weeks after my first day of class, and just kind of took off from there.
Yeah, and to get that actually builds me to another question I had, but what was it like your first game at WVUM and how did that go for you?
Oh man, you know what? I have listened back to it a couple times. I've come a long way, to say the absolute least. I was calling volleyball versus South Florida. I had never called a volleyball game in my life. I had told my sports director at the time, like, hey, I don't have a whole ton of play-by-play experience, but I've wanted to do this for a long time. And he saw that I was willing to work and he put me on that game after I had produced the week before. And it was frantic prep. I was still learning how to prep for games. I was in contact with one of my friends from high school that played and was just trying to get as much information from her as I could. So I'll be honest, it was a lot of shakiness in it for a first time, but I was very nervous. I was also very excited. It took me a while to really feel comfortable on air, but overall, for a first time, the guy who I worked with said I did a very good job. We wound up working, I want to say 50 games together over the 3 years. So it was a really cool experience.
It is great. I mean, I can say like as far as taking a chance, I was definitely like you coming in thinking your shake. I guarantee it was much better than mine because I really took like a shock. When I got on air for the first time, I was like never been on air other than like hosting radio shifts. So for anyone that's, and I don't regret it now. So for anyone that's having that like level of pause, thinking about, I don't know if I want to potentially embarrass yourself. Like the way I see it is if it has to happen, just let it happen, but then you can build and grow moving forward. So nonetheless, going off that point about getting into it, did you have a specific broadcaster that, you wanted to model growing up?
That's a great question. To me, I see broadcasting as an art form. And a phrase that I heard about art is you take a little bit from a lot of different artists, you kind of make it your own. I really liked Kevin Harlan growing up. I thought his authenticity and just energy just sucked you into a broadcast. And that's always like my one rule when I go into broadcasts. Sometimes I'll be more prepped than others. Sometimes I'll have a little more energy than others. But my most important thing going into a broadcast is you have to make your job entertaining. If I'm not entertained in a broadcast, people listening aren't going to be entertained. And every time I tuned into Kevin Harlan, he always had this energy that you always just wanted to listen to, whether it was him calling J.R. Smith throwdown posterizers in 2006 or him still doing March Madness buzzer beaters in 2023. He's always had the same energy throughout his career. So I really looked up to him.
That's great. I know a lot of people definitely say Kevin Harlan because he's got that unique, and another one, Gus Johnson, for their energy. Probably like the top two voices that you're going to think of in terms of bring it to a broadcast. But also, did you have someone that you met like I know I'm sure you've met a lot of broadcasters at this point, but either in Duluth or Garden City or in Miami that like has personally met along the way that had a lot of influence on you beyond what you looked up to growing up?
Yeah. Actually, my biggest influence from Miami did come from a play-by-play broadcaster, but we had a Zoom my freshman year with Scott Van Pelt, who is the longtime voice of SportsCenter, has his own hour slot now at the 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock hours, depending on when games wrap up. But what he told me, he actually was very cool. He was able to do question answers, and I got to ask him a question about the industry because I was just breaking in at the time. And what he told me is, I don't care how good you are at play by play. I don't care how comfortable you are on air. You have to be able to storytell in this industry. And it took a couple years for me to understand what that meant. But as I matured and got through Miami, I really put a lot more emphasis on storytelling and making people want to know more about just the stats than these guys have. Because it's easy for anybody to pull up numbers of how good a player is with guys in scoring position or what a quarterback's percentage is in the red zone. But what people really care about is who these people are off the field. And it took me a couple years to get used to that. But once I kind of remembered that piece of advice from Scott Van Pelt, I think it changed the way I broadcasted, and it honestly made me a lot better for it.
Yeah, that's a great point because I know a lot of people have talked about like that, and especially the way in a game like baseball to be able to sync stories in has been can what really separate people. And also, do you have a favorite sport to broadcast? And I guess why would that be? Because speaking of stories, I know some are like it's harder when you're doing basketball to fit in a story as opposed to baseball. So I guess can you tell me your favorite sport to broadcast?
No, I'd say I've fallen in love with baseball. It was something I didn't do a whole ton of before I got to Miami. I wound up working three different internships on it. And I think those internships really made me love the art of broadcasting baseball because, like you said, you get to tell the stories on air. You get to meet with these guys during practices. These guys come from all over the place when you work in summer ball, whether you work at a college, whether you're even just doing high school. People come from all over the place, and you get to learn who they are as people, who influence them, and you get to talk about their stories on air. And that's really the sport that separates you just knowing these guys athletes versus being able to really tell who they are as people. And that's something I really have fallen in love with.
Yeah, that's good. And because I tried to really fit those stories in and learn more about the guys. And that's something that unique about baseball is you're around the game so much and like there's so many games you have to be in and around that. And do you have any because I know this one of the interesting things about minor league or summer league baseball is definitely the travel grind is a lot different. And like at major league, I guess, you're in the nicest hotel, nicest X, Y, and Z. And even though it is a grind, it's a different way. So there's so many good stories I feel like that come out of being around the team so much. Do you have any like crazy things that happen either in Duluth or, any other summer ball stops? I guess Miami would, I don't know if it qualifies. There's not as much travel or there's gaps between games, but do you have any like crazy instances like the bus broke down or something in Duluth when you're going to a game and you just tell us a little bit about that?
Ooh, you know what? Now you bring up Duluth. I have a lot of great stories with traveling. I think that's when your job as a broadcaster becomes so personal because you are with these guys for hours on ends, and you're getting to know them, they're getting to know you, and you get to spend time with each other off the field. And that's where those personal bonds really come into play. I guess the craziest instance from Duluth is on our way back from an 8 game road trip. We were playing in lacrosse and we had like a 4 hour drive back to Duluth. And around hour two of that, you just hear this loud crash on our bus. And we wound up accidentally killing a deer. It was roadkill. But the funny thing was the game after we were playing a team called the Bucks. And I had made the joke on the bus to one of our players, like, hey, that's mental. Get ready for tomorrow. That's exactly what you need. He winds up hitting the go-ahead single in the 8th inning. And I wound up interviewing him after the game for our TV broadcast. And right before we go on air, he tells me, he's like, hey, visual influence, right? So it was just kind of one of those small moments that came a long way. But there are so many good travel bonds I have. One of my best experiences, honestly, at Miami was the ACC Baseball Championship my senior year. We went on the run and we made it to the ACC championship game But just getting to see those guys after the wins at the hotel, I was on the floor with a couple of the guys on the team. We were having so much fun throughout. I got blasted by some water guns at one point during that trip. Mafia bus rides my sophomore summer with the Valley Blue Sox were awesome. That's the thing that I really love about baseball is when you get to spend that time with the guys and you all just get to connect. They know you, you know them, and then it becomes less and less like a job.
Yeah, exactly. I know, see, I'm looking more forward to that and embracing that grind because when I was in Quincy, I was doing all the home games and then I was doing it solo, which was great because I felt like I was getting more experience like each game than or almost as many games as like somebody doing 60 but with two people, so that was great. And then I was working a lot during the day, so I'm ready to, I guess, embrace that travel grind, and we'll see like what comes out of it. And I think I'm riding solo out of the games as well, but that's going to be an interesting thing
It's
to get.
awesome.
And also especially up in the Northwest, an area I haven't been yet. But going off that point, I guess now you're in Garden City, you've done so many games at this point just in general. So I guess like what is the difference between prepping for a game in Garden City versus in Miami, just in the whole process? Like for example, if you show up to football at Hard Rock Stadium, I'm sure it's, you gotta walk like 3 miles just to get to the broadcast booth versus Garden City. How is that kind of different as opposed to on different stops, I guess?
No, I mean it's very different. I don't have to walk all the way across the stadium like we have to at VUM. I just get to walk straight up to the box, which makes it easy. Getting to prep for these games, I do all the games by myself here. That's always a big thing, is finding more talking points rather than just individual stats, because I like to really find these guys' stories. We talk about it in Miami. You find guys from all across the country, but they're all super talented. They've been 3 stars and 4 stars. They've dealt with the line life their entire life. Here, I mean, we have so many different guys that have either come from that or are under recruited and just have so many different ways of life that you get to know these guys from, whether they're from Texas, from Hawaii, from Florida, or even just from right downtown or right across town, I should say, in Garden City. So that's always something that I try and change up with here is you could find a guy who's from 5 minutes away or from an entirely different part of the world. And I always like to try and find, what brought them here, what makes them click, why are they still playing football, stuff like that.
Yeah, that's great. I remember you had a on Twitter. I remember, I think this was in the fall when you had a great sit down series with a lot of players. I thought that was really interesting. So that's another thing that you get to know them. And do you feel like too when you were spending, I guess, more time like on football, basketball, etc., on the field in that capacity as opposed to and how much of an advantage is that to get to know the guys? Like, I'm sure, you had more access, I suppose, at Garden City compared to Miami. When you have like media access, you may get granted an interview, but you don't know. Like, how much more access do you have in Garden City, and does that make it much easier for you?
I mean, it does, but it's something you have to work for. I mean, this is something I 100% recommend to anybody who's going to a small town, working either Division 1 or Division 2 program, JUCO life, NAIA. The closer that you get with the people on the team, the better things that come out of it. Because initially, when I pitched the idea of that sit down series, I had met my coaches a couple weeks ago, and they were kind of like, sure. I wanted to really do a good job to promote these guys to the town because these are players that are from all over. Most of the people in Garden City have no idea who these players are, but these are the players that are going to be representing this city. And I thought it was important for these guys to have their message out there, whether they're D1 bounce backs or guys who are under recruited or guys that are even right from Garden City that are trying to make an impact at the next level. I want people to know who these guys are. And me heading out to those extra practices before, there were a lot of nights I didn't even do that stuff. I would just show up to practice to get to know these guys, watch some of them play, talk to some of the assistant coaches, and it wound up kind of leading to long-term trust between me and the program. And I was super blessed to work with the coaching staff that we had this football season. And as I started to do those interviews, initially I asked them like, hey, what players would be personal? What guys would work best for it? And I got like 3 or 4 recommendations. And when I asked them at first, they're kind of like, yeah, okay, I'll do it. It was a minute and a half. I wound up getting to talk to the guys afterwards. So I really began to form some of those personal bonds with the guys. And then it turned around to me showing up at practice and me having 3 or 4 guys like, hey, when are you talking to me? It was just cool to see me grow from, the guy who'd shown up out of nowhere and is going to be the radio voice to now someone who the players really trust and the coaches want to get the message out there with some of these guys.
Yeah, that's a great point because going off that, I tried to do something a little bit similar when I was working with WGM and get it out there in a different capacity, although it was on the TV station. But I can certainly say I felt like that was a way to connect it back to the city. But I think the biggest thing is well about that you're bringing up is that, people don't know those players beforehand. But what's crazy is that, you'll see like in the NFL, you're like Brock Purdy, for example, like last pick in the draft wasn't the craziest recruit. So that just gets exemplified at summer baseball and a lot of like JUCO stops, or especially Garden City, where we'll get somebody that is, out of the blue, but then can turn out to be something that everybody's going to know about in a few years. So now that you've been, I guess, at Garden City for the year, you also did, summer ball and all that. Do you remember any players that came through that nobody knew or was talking about, and then now is like killing it and really advancing their career?
Yeah, actually. So this guy didn't play for my team, but when I was in the Northwoods League, we were working against a team called the St. Cloud Rocks, who happened to have this red shirt outfielder by the name of Charlie Condon, who didn't play a game for Georgia. He was a high recruit, but he walked on. Nobody had ever seen what he does. He comes to my league and starts to play really well. He was named the Northwoods League All-Star. And then out of absolutely nowhere, right after spending the summer in the Northwoods League, he turns into one of the best freshmen in the nation. And he's now, I believe, leading the NCAA in home runs as we're recording this. I think he's got 13 on the year already. It's really cool to see some of these guys that, even whether on your team or you're covering against them, all of a sudden blossom because it's like, wow, I saw this guy at the start. So Charlie Condon's probably the guy who's coming to my head first right now. But it's cool because you and I have called a couple of guys at Miami who are now playing in spring training. Carson Palmquist, Slade Zacconi. Like, it's really cool because I've spent bus rides with these guys. I've been in the same room as these guys when they've received news of when they're playing in the NCAA tournament. And then you turn around 2 years later and they're playing in March.
Yeah, I know that's been one thing that I've also just been looking forward to as well, to see how some of the players will develop, because there's going to be, I'm sure, a lot of interesting stories that come from that. And do you have also, I guess, at Garden City, do you have favorite story from an athlete that stands out, like one that would be, I guess, great to share? I know you've already shared a few, but like one that really stood out that was great there in Garden City. Because again, going back to the point, like people might know at D1 or pro sports a great story of a player that does something great. But what at Garden City, do you have like one that stands out?
I guess I'd say the one that stands out is from our men's basketball team. So at the start of the year, we had a player leave about a month before the season starts, and we had another guy get added to the roster. I asked my coach about him before the season started, and he said he's not going to play. He's going to redshirt this season. He then gets into our lineup because one of our guards suffers a long-term injury. And after paying basically no attention to him other than at practice, I get the message from our coach saying Elijah Roberts is going to play tonight. And this is somebody who played high school basketball with our starting center, got added to our roster, I want to say 2, 3 weeks before our season, because our center would not stop showing this guy's huddle tape to our coaches. And our coaches turned to him and it's like, hey, we really like this guy too, but we don't have a space on our roster. And he's currently at the University of Dallas for bowling. That's where his career went. I didn't know it when he came over here, but he actually tore his ACL his junior year and he was really under recruited. So he wound up going to the University of Dallas for bowling. But then once the roster spot opened up, our center reached back out to him because they had a really tight bond after playing in high school. He makes his way over to our roster, and our team, which was very dedicated off scoring from our starting lineup, all of a sudden at the start of January has this sixth man who's scoring in double figures constantly. And it's just the most, where did this guy come from story ever? And it shows that, players don't give up on this. This is somebody who had dreams of playing basketball at the collegiate level in high school, tears his ACL, doesn't get an opportunity to play his senior year, doesn't give up on the game, finds a crazy connection through one of his old teammates, gets his way onto a roster, is expected to not play all season long, and then turns into one of our most important players, I should say, in the second half. So that's definitely the wildest story.
That is amazing. That kind of sounds as well like a lot of players got kind of screwed on the COVID year when they're going into their senior season. So there was a ton of like they're still feeling the ramifications of crazy happenstances like that, having to miss a whole season. And I couldn't imagine being an athlete in that kind of scenario. And I know, I guess going back to Miami and really now in Garden City, 'cause you're still doing it. I try to do a lot of ancillary work around play-by-play, so that whether that be the writing or like, doing stand-ups and TV and everything. So, how much do you feel like that, because a lot of people obviously would want to do full-time announcing, but there's so much else that goes into it. So how much do you feel like that kind of stuff has helped you behind the microphone?
Oh my God, unbelievably. I didn't really see it as much that the two go hand in hand. I talked about my stuff with Scott Van Pelt earlier. Again, I just didn't really see through that until probably my junior year, where I decided, you know what? I wrote in high school. That's really how I got into Miami, was my work off journalism rather than broadcasting. But I did a lot of writing in high school, and that wound up transitioning over to college because I got recruited by one of my friends. He's like, hey, would you want to help write for the Miami Hurricane this year? And initially I was a little hesitant, but I decided, you know what? I think this can really help me as a broadcaster. And I read up on some opinions from guys on the SDAA boards, and they said, like, these things go hand in hand. This will help you out. And as I got more and more comfortable writing for the Hurricane, I felt my broadcast stories become more and more impressive. I got comfortable using different words that I used writing versus words that I didn't necessarily use broadcasting. It increased my diction, it increased my storytelling, it increased ways even that I just looked through stats during the games. So honestly, I feel like if you write really well, you can make the transition to broadcasting just as easily. Your opens become second nature to you now. You know how to find stories on guys. You've been able to talk to these guys off air. When you do a feature story on a broadcast, or excuse me, you do a feature story on a student athlete, you get to talk to them off air. You use that stuff in your broadcast. Boom, that's something that nobody else has. And that's something that I really took to heart my last couple of years, was getting to do those feature stories and transitioning those stories into my broadcasts. So in my opinion, when you write really well and you find a way how to be a great journalist, it makes you an even better broadcaster.
Yeah, I would agree with that for sure. I know I've seen that kind of transition, especially at least at the very least getting extra information. And by the way, at the time, like I said, like I'll just re-up a link. Is I'm sure we'll have like a few questions beyond the 8 minutes and 30 seconds we have. But anyway, going into now with the Kansas City Monarchs, I think is like one of the bases we haven't covered yet. You just got that position. And so congratulations on that. So they're in the American Association. And I guess, is there any different approach you're going to be taking that going into this baseball year as opposed to years prior?
You know what? That's something I'm going to figure out throughout the season. I really took a different approach to baseball this last year in terms of using a lot more of these stories versus some of the stats. And with the American Association, these are all guys that either played in the major leagues or had an opportunity in the minors, or at the very least were superstars in college. So I really want to know, why go to the American Association? Why not, keep trying to get things to work in Double A? What do you want to improve while you're here? I want to learn more about that than how they're doing during the seasons. Obviously, it's going to help when a guy's hitting the ball well. Hey, what's working for you at the plate? Or when a guy's going through a funk. Hey, how are you planning on getting out of this? But I really want to know, is why are you here? Where are some of the coolest experiences that you've had throughout here? And because a lot of our broadcast is going to be on a stream versus radio, I'm going to have a lot more time to get these stories in and take a little less of an emphasis towards direct black and white play-by-play versus being able to really broaden the picture and being able to bring these guys' lives to the people that are listening to our broadcasts.
That's great. And also, you bring up radio and TV, and you've done basically both. And kind of, do you have a different approach going into, let's say you're doing a game Duluth on ESPN Plus, but then you're on like Mixler or the radio broadcast the next day? Is there any different things you're doing, whether it be the night before or like hours leading up to the broadcast?
That's honestly something that I learned a lot of during my time in Duluth was the differences you had to make between radio broadcasting and play-by-play broadcasting. I'd say in terms of the prep, I tried to keep everything the exact same, but just in terms of how you broadcast, there was a lot of air that I filled on TV that I was so used to with radio that I can't wait to get back to Kansas City and maybe make some changes on that. So honestly, it changes so much about how you broadcast when you can let the moment breathe a little more on TV versus where you have to be precise on location, where the ball is when you're on radio. So honestly, not as much in terms of preparation difference, but just in terms of broadcasting difference, there's an ocean's world apart between radio and TV.
That's another great point. And going back to Kansas City, and I guess this grind in baseball. Do you know how many games you'll have with the Monarchs, and do you think your baseball, I guess, stops prior? Because I know American Association, I'm assuming they're going to play a ton of games from what I understand, and it looked into, especially looking at positions there. How many games do you kind of anticipate doing, and is this going to be, a whole new grind to where you're getting close to that MILB, MLB type schedule as opposed to summer ball in the past where some teams will play like, 100 games, but some only 60. Are you preparing differently for that, I guess, amount of games?
I'm gonna be honest, you got me lacking here. I'm so
Uh,
focused on our JUCO season that I don't exactly know how many. I know our season is from May 16th is our home opener, and I believe our final game of the regular season is September 3rd. So we have off days once a week. But if you want to do the math in your head, go ahead. I do all our home games. The biggest thing that I've learned in doing baseball is that it's a day-to-day thing. There's some days where you're going to show up to the office and you're going to be the most prep broadcaster you can be. And when it comes time to get on air, sometimes you don't have it that day. And other days, maybe you don't show up as prepared and you show up and you give your best couple calls. So honestly, I just want to try and prepare day in, day out to the best of my ability and bring my best attitude forward. I think that's the biggest change that I've made from my time interning in the NECBL or the Northwoods League versus where I'm at now is just bringing my best attitude day in, day out, finding ways to not get down on myself when I might have a knock on a game, or finding ways to just stay positive throughout. Because when you bring your best you every single day, even if your best doesn't show up, your attitude controls how you broadcast. And that's something that I'm really looking forward to bringing to Kansas City because I've got 50, 60 home games. Some games I'm only going to do 3 innings of play by play. Our Saturday home games, I'm fortunate enough to do all 9 innings of play by play on radio. But regardless of how those days go, whether we win or lose, whether I call poorly or I call phenomenally, I want to be the best me I can be to our fellow workers, to my broadcast partner, Carter Woodiel. And I want to find a way just to be at my best at all times, but also just bringing the best version of me.
Coming off the baseball, the point, I guess, how does your what are your goals, I guess, in the next 5 to 10 years in terms of you know, dream positions and dream, how much you want to advance, and especially, I think another big thing as well, like, would you rather, I guess, be doing all sports or like specialize and ride, one sport? Like, for example, if you could have like a college job in college baseball or college football, but you wanted to be an MLB broadcaster, maybe you'd have to stick to baseball only. Like, what are your kind of dreams and aspirations in the next 5 years?
Man, this industry is a crazy place. I came to Garden City not knowing if I could do football or basketball on the radio. And after working here, I have so much confidence in my abilities there. My long-term goals the next 5, 10 years don't actually revolve around what job I have, but rather what connections I make. I want to become someone that's very well versed. I want to become somebody that can talk to a lot of different guys in the industry about these jobs. They don't have to be people that are super well known. They don't have to be the top dogs of the industry. They don't have to be your head ESPN broadcasters or your Learfield broadcasters, but I want to find a way to just become as well versed as I can with my connections because I don't know where this career could take me. I could meet somebody this next month, and all I could know, they know somebody who retires in the next season, and I stumble to being an NFL radio broadcaster, or I meet somebody who's involved in Fox Productions, and a couple of years down the line, maybe I'm one of the lead producers at Fox. I don't know. It's just a crazy ride that this industry is because there's so few opportunities and so many people who want to do this. So my goal for the next 5, 10 years, honestly, isn't a set position or even a set sport. It's just to become as connected as I can.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point to make as well, because that's probably a much better goal, I guess, like aspiring for a position that you don't know will open. But I'm assuming, with your knowledge and the way you just improve, I think, as long as you're, making all those connections and X, Y, and Z, things will end up working out. So I guess that's a greater plan than falling on to a job. And I would say as well, like, that would be a better way to go about it. But also for moving forward on any other sport, is there anything that you're not doing now? I guess like let's say, hockey, for example. I haven't done any hockey. I don't know how to do it great. So is there any sport that you're not doing now that you would want to do in the future?
That's a great question. I actually really wanted to get into soccer. I tried a little bit of that here. I was by myself and I was kind of learning the team on the fly, but I would really love to be able to work in soccer because there's a lot of broadcasters that I take from international display that have influenced the way I broadcast. I listen to a lot of Peter Drury, I listen to a lot of John Champion, and I try and take their bits of storytelling and implement into my American sports that I broadcast. So I guess of all the sports that I have not done yet, which started to become pretty few, I would say soccer would be the one I really want to add to my arsenal.
But it's also the to mention, I know AJ Ricketts talked about Peter Drury being one of those guys. I believe it was him that in soccer. So I haven't been the biggest soccer person, but he's definitely starting to already stand out, obviously. So that must be another broadcast to look up to. And I would say, as far as like me and kind of what I just tried to take away is definitely you, and with this podcast, is figure out, what those people that are really doing so well so early on in broadcasting are doing and kind of learn from them almost, which is almost seems separate from, I guess, what, some people would think. Like maybe just look at who's the top dog and what did they do. But I'm kind of almost, I don't know about you, I'm almost like more impressed by those that got to like a huge position really early on because it must have meant they really did something special and spectacular. So that's a lot of people I've looked up to or tried to model, which I think it's great to see you're doing the same thing as well. Because I don't know like how it worked in the past, but I feel like it was a lot harder. I mean, AJ talked about it. He's like, well, I was up and working TV for a couple of years in Carolina and doing that before he was able to get like the FIU opportunity and said he wanted to do more play-by-play, but it's really tough to get that position right out of college, but you were able to pretty much just slip right into a full-time play-by-play position. So obviously you're leading the way in that direction. And would you say another thing, I guess going back to your current situation, just to round it out, like with Garden City, do you know how many more games like you have to do or you have coming up before their athletic season ends? And then like how soon do you ship out to Kansas City to get things started?
I want to say I have about 30 more games left because my schedule for the rest of the year is conference play of community college baseball and then home games for high school baseball and softball. I believe I only got about 10 for the high school, and I believe it's 20, give or take, for the college. So that's how much time I have there. I move out to Kansas City at the start of May. Our season opens up on the road. I'll be working remotely, but my first broadcast is May 16th at home.
Awesome. And I actually like that you brought up the remote. Have you figured out any way to best do remote broadcasts? Because I know that's one thing that's become, and I think I asked Andres Tejeda, who's another previous guest, about remote, but like what are your best, I guess, tips for navigating that? Because I think that's always interesting from the viewer. They can kind of tell it's remote, but how do you, I guess, blend that to do your best possible job when you're away from the action?
Oh, I should have clarified. It's not remote broadcasting. I'm more
Oh, okay.
game notes. No, it's okay. It's okay. I do have an answer for that if you want me to give it
But
though.
well, I still, yeah, that would be, I guess, great because I don't know how many people are going to still have to do remote, but I know you've done a couple, I'm sure, at VUM when the pandemic hit. So I guess what would be your tips on that?
Yeah, that was one of the craziest things I've ever done. The end of my freshman year, I did not expect to be calling my first ever football game for the Miami Hurricanes off a monitor in our studio lounge as we're playing a primetime game against Louisville. But lo and behold, that's what our crazy situation was back in 2020. I guess I would just say my biggest advice to working remotely is to just bring the same energy. That's what's going to make people attracted to your broadcast because that was honestly one of the things I really struggled with was even when we had no fans in attendance, just being at the games in person, I was able to bring the same affliction to a crowd of zero versus a sold out crowd that I wound up working my junior and senior years at Miami. But I would say the one thing that I recommend with remote broadcasting is treat it like you're there. If you don't treat it like you're there, you're going to lose interest because people aren't going to be as entertained by your calls. But if you bring the people to the event, even if you're not physically there, it will make people tune in.
Yeah, it's a good point. See, because I got lucky as far as the pandemic was concerned, I guess, with VUM, because that was another tough spot for broadcasting. But when I was coming into from St. Louis Community College, like there was actually we had like a couple of play-by-play boards to do that they did. I know basketball and baseball, but it turned out the pandemic kind of screwed that up. So I did get really lucky that it timed out well right when you guys were going back to in person. I didn't really experience Miami in the pandemic. It was more at community college, and so obviously we all hope that it doesn't become too much of a thing because it's just tougher to do the remote broadcast. But I know for baseball. Have you been to Kansas City? I guess that's honestly a big stop just to speak of the city, like as far as everything that's going on, with the Chiefs and the barbecue. Do you have any like experience in that area, Kansas City?
It's crazy, actually. I won't move to Kansas City and I won't take a step in Kansas City until I'm working there. But
Wow.
I know a lot of people here who have been around the area, and I'm fortunate enough to have a lot of good recommendations. And I'm even more blessed to the fact that I'll actually know two people from University of Miami who I worked with that will be in the area that I'm going to be able to connect with and make friends with more and more. So I'm going to have people there. I'm going to have a strong understanding of the area, but I will not venture into Kansas City until I'm working there. So it's a little crazy, but I'm excited for it.
Yeah, I think it can. It's pretty. I mean, it's a cool city. There's definitely a lot going on. They love their sports teams, especially like when the Royals were doing well. They were all over that team. And as far as I guess rounding things out here, is there anything that you're even in broadcast like next week, tomorrow, whenever is your next broadcast, like is there anything that you or do you feel like I guess you're learning things like continuously the next week that you just hadn't even thought about before? And like, are you still kind of feeling like you're developing in that sense to where you're like, wow, why didn't I think to research this stat before the game for the last 3 years? Do you have any like new ideas popping out each week?
I'm gonna use a phrase that my women's basketball coach taught me while I was here. If you're not learning, you're burning. And I'm somebody that I'm always my own biggest critic. I always like to go back and find what I did right, what things I can improve on, because in my opinion, we're going to be learning for the rest of our lives. Like, I don't think either of us will ever get to the point where, whether we're 35, 45, 55, or fortunately, if we're still doing this at 65, going to sit there and say, I have this all figured out. I never want to be at that point. I always am somebody who's hungry to learn more, somebody who's willing to take a different perspective from even another broadcaster, or whether I hear something back in my reps to where it's like, oh, maybe I should use this stat instead of over relying on RBI, or maybe if I hear a certain story that a broadcaster tells on air, I'd be like, okay, can I relate this to one of my players? I'm going to be learning every day for the rest of my life. And that's honestly something that I look forward to the most. Isn't the reps, but it's where I'm going to be in the next 5, 10 years. What lessons am I going to learn? What people am I going to meet that are going to help me on my journey? So, honestly, in terms of specific ideas right now, going into my next broadcast, which is next Thursday, no, not off the top of my head. But will I have a million and one other ideas once I finish up those two games? Absolutely. And that's what keeps me going every single day.
Yeah, I like that because I bring that up. I think I've asked everyone kind of that. Like, I mean, is you really there's no like manual on how to do play by play. There's no like book on it or like anything. So you can honestly, I mean, you could technically say anything at any time, and it's like you just don't. There's no ideas that come into my head, and that until like you get to a certain point. Like for example, I guess like this would be an example like a statistic you look up like left and right batting splits or something. You might not have thought about that doing like the first 30 games, and then just like suddenly you're like, oh yeah, that might be like a great idea that really spices up the broadcast and lets people know. Like if there's a big situation where the guy bats 400 versus righties, 200 versus lefties somehow, those kinds of things, like that's why I think play-by-play is so difficult, but also crazy at the same times. You can just literally things can come out of your brain and there's no manual on it that told you to do that. And all of a sudden it really enhances a broadcast. So I guess flowing off that to kind of round things out, I guess is there any other big projects that are going on in your life while you're trying to, do play by play with the Monarchs and the Busters, everything else that you have going on?
Right now, besides just being able to work baseball here and getting ready to work for the Monarchs, I'd say that's what I'm focused on. Obviously, I'm trying to do different things every day. I do coaches shows throughout the week where I'm trying to get better at interviewing live in the moment. I've gotten a lot better from when I started, I can tell you that much. But outside of that, no. I mean, I'm pretty focused on myself, keeping my relationship with my friends, and overall just growing as a person before these next couple months get crazy because it's March 14th. We're talking about this. I'm gonna blink and it'll be May 3rd, and I'll be moving to Kansas City. And then I'm going to blink again, and it's going to be September the 18th, and our season might be over. And then I'm going to have to figure out what comes next. But I've already started kind of looking at stuff for that. I don't know what's going to come next. This road's crazy. I've met a million and one different people that are involved in this industry, and there's a million and two different ways to get to the top. So I'm just super excited to keep looking forward to these next couple months, meet as many people as I can, hopefully improve as much as I can with baseball, and just see where my life takes me.
Yeah, and I would say actually last thing because you mentioned it, you're moving around a lot or you've got new friends and everything else. And this can apply to honestly anyone like in a industry that you got to move a lot or even probably baseball players, like for example, that literally go, single A or in one city, double A the next city, then you can move back down. Like you don't know where you're going to end up. And I'm wondering, that's a crazy life to live. So how do you, best manage being mobile all the time and literally like moving all over the country?
That's a great question because, especially in this industry now, I mean, we walk out of Miami and the next second we're in a town of 2,000. And then 9 months later, we're going to be back to a city of millions. So that's where my life is taking me. I think what helps me out the most with keeping my life as normal as it can be is to have a work-life balance and to be able to fall back on other things I enjoy. I've really gotten into running over the last 3, 4 years since COVID. I've always tried to do that regardless of where I am. I try and make as many friends in the area that I am. I consider myself as kind of an antisocial extrovert to where I'll go out and meet people. Sometimes I keep a small circle, but I have that small circle of people that if I'm feeling a little lonely or if I'm bored at a point, I can say, hey, do you want to go grab food right now? Or, hey, do you want to go work out right now? And most importantly, I try my best to keep in touch with the people who I've met along the way because that's honestly what keeps me going sometimes is just to hear how some of my best friends are doing, that they care how I'm doing. And I'm trying my best to keep in touch with as many people as I can because that's what keeps me going at the end of the day is to be able to hear how well some of my friends are doing at their jobs, whether it's the same thing as me or something completely different, and to have the me know that they're listening to me, they care about the job I'm doing, they want to know how I'm doing outside of my work. That's what keeps it going. Is for as crazy as my life can be, whether I'm working 6 different nights a week or I'm doing double headers of baseball or basketball, as long as I can head back to my place at night and have my friends to talk to and know that they're there for me and I'm there for them, that's what makes it worth it.
Yeah, that's great. I think it's gotten a little bit easier now with social media to be connected to more people, or you can be in a different location and still have those friends. But I thought that was a great, thing to mention because that's a lot of people. I think they never just leave their hometown if they're in a certain industry. But in this, like you kind of have to be able to move at any time, and so yeah, that might not be for everyone to get worried about that. But I think, obviously with social media age a little bit easier, but also a good thing to talk about because it's not always easy to navigate. But lastly, I guess last question, do you have any things you want to shout out or immediate things you want to go on and let people know about?
Um, yeah, there's a lot. I'm gonna try and condense it as much as I can. Just to elaborate on that last bit, I always prefer to just call my friends. I know FaceTime's kind of the way of the day now, but I'm somebody who I'm trying to get off social media. I'm trying to enjoy life a little more. I've gotten off Snapchat this year. I've limited my time on Instagram. I'm not on TikTok anymore, which I think came at the perfect time because if you've been reading up stories on that, I
Yes.
think I might not be the only one who's off TikTok in these next couple weeks. I guess just the two people I really want to thank are I worked a lot with somebody named Rich Hollenberg. He does a break-in and breakthrough cohort where he reaches out to broadcasters across the country, and we're in all kind of different positions. And we met once a week for 8 weeks to discuss different ways to network, different ways to build up your reel, different ways to sound on air, and he's helped me out over the last couple of months. So I have to say thank you so much to him. And obviously to anybody who wanted to listen to this, who I've kept in touch with over the last couple of months. Like the transition from Miami to Garden City at times was not easy. And what made it easy was being able to have some of my best friends there to talk to, hear how they're doing. They care about how I'm doing. And it's just meant a lot to have people in my corner while I've been going through this crazy part of life, which is going to get even crazier in these next couple of years. But thank you so much for having me on, man. I mean, I've really enjoyed this, and I'm rooting for you all the way. Nothing but the best.
And we really appreciate it. Again, that's Kyle Friedman, voiceover in Garden City, going to be with the Kansas City Monarchs, doing a ton of games and has a bright future for sure with a lot going on. So you don't know him now, I'm sure Cal is going to be interrupting your day at some point if you want to turn on maybe an MLB or NBA broadcast. You'll see him there anyway. I feel like that's where he's headed nonetheless. But it was great to have you on. And obviously, you're going to be a great information to provide information, trying to get everyone's take and learn other tips of broadcasting, what you're doing to get in, X, Y, and Z, the networking and the stories. I love the stories that you told, especially Garden City that don't get out to as many people and trying to figure out how to get those out because there's so many unique things that happen, especially as the broadcaster and seeing it day to day. But again, thank you for coming on and best of luck in Garden City. Hope we can keep in touch, man.
Of course. Thank you, my man.
All right, thank you. I'll see you later.